Yeah, it comes back up again in the second parak. I think most of the important Rishonim are here. Oh, is this live broadcasting now? Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. Okay.
Did you put in?
Let me press.
Did you press the number?
Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Today is Friday, the 8th of Adar. It is March 18th.
Yes,
18th. I didn't get totally lost. Okay. Dan Margulies, I'm filling in for Rabbi Linzer while he is away, and we are on Kiddushin Daf Zion. Really jam-packed daf today with all sorts of interesting things. But hopefully we'll be able to get through everything in a reasonable amount of time. And let's just start right from the bottom, the last line of Vav and Bet. This is going to introduce.
That's where we are.
Oh, perfect. I was wondering, I wasn't here yesterday, so I don't know exactly the spot, but it's a perfect spot. Yep. So we're going to have 3 cases introduced by Rava, which are strange cases of Kiddushin. Then we're going to have a 4th case, which is itself even stranger, perhaps. And a major question would be, how do these cases work? The problem is that in a normal case of Kiddushin, the act of Kiddushin is that the man would give something of value to the woman, and that's what we would consider to be kesef Kiddushin. That's the object of value, or the money that's being used to effect the kinyan of the Kiddushin. That is the, whatever it is, it's not really purchase, obviously. We've touched on that before, but the notion that Kiddushin is effected through some kind of a transaction, some kind of a formalized process, which introduces the both prohibitive aspects of marriage as well as certain other aspects of the requirements of marriage as well. And that's effected through, in this case, kesef, or in the whole studies of Kiddushin kesef. So here are unique or strange ways of doing Kiddushin kesef. So Amar Rava. Rava says, 10 mane leploni. Now this is going to get a little bit tricky, so maybe we need to write it out on the board. We're going to have 3 different cases that are going to involve 3 players. That is, we're going to have, we'll call...
That doesn't erase too well.
Oh, the green one doesn't erase so well? Sorry.
This one did.
Okay, it's all right. Okay. Aleph is Isha, Bet is the Baal, the husband, and we're going to have Pei is Ploni. Okay? Is a third party. So, Amar Rava, 10 mane leploni. Rava said, in a case of 10 mane leploni, v'kadesh lach, mekudeshet. The man tells the woman, give money to Ploni. The money goes from the... Sorry, I drew it wrong already. The money goes from the woman to a third party. The man does not give any money. The woman does not receive any money. The woman gives money to a third party.
Wait, so it really should be Tmi money leploni.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
It should be.
Yeah.
We know that sometimes the grammar around certain verbs perhaps a little bit fluid in the rabbinic period. 10 mane leploni.
So whose money is this? Is her money that she's giving to, or is somebody else's
presumably
money?
It is her money. There's a major machlokes rishonim here about how does this work. We're going to get back into that once we just can go through the cases. So 10 mane leploni v'kadesh lach mekudeshet midin arev. An arev is a guarantor or a cosigner on a loan. That is, if someone is borrowing money, the lova goes to the malva to borrow the money, and maybe the lova is unreliable, so the malva requests someone else to come along to guarantee the loan. The arev, even though the arev gets no benefit from co-signing on the loan, nonetheless obligates him or herself to pay back the loan in a case of default. So midin arev, that means, and now the Gemara explains, arev la v'afal gav delo mate hana liyadeh kamishavit nafshe. An arev who, even though gets no benefit of his own, nonetheless obligates himself to pay. So too, the woman who does not get any benefit from this transaction, that is, the husband has not given her any money, nonetheless, she obligates herself to enter into the marital relationship.
I don't understand that.
Okay, we have to... Let's just...
the malva and the arev.
She is being compared, in this case, to the arev in that, although she gets no benefit, she has obligated herself.
And she's also giving the money. She's also going into her pocket and giving the money. So she's also
now maybe
the malva.
Right.
She's also the malva.
Fine, you could make a similar point. The point is, even when an arev pays back the loan, the arev has to go into his own pocket and pay the defaulted balance of the loan.
Is this a loan or is this like
it's not a loan?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Arev is for a loan. Though.
Arev is being used as an analogous, archetypical transactional type. That is, an arev is someone who obligates him or herself, even though does not receive benefit from the transaction.
So what the kuchen is here?
Wait, what, David has a
Yeah.
question.
According to this translation, she doesn't give her own money, though.
It's a machlokes
So
Rishonim whether
she
she
asked
gives
the
her own
man-
money or
oh,
not.
Okay.
So, okay, according to this one.
Okay.
That's what I-
Again, in the Gemara, the husband's statement is
She tells
ambiguous,
the
right?
man to give the money.
So now we have to just address the question of what mechanism is at play here to make this a good Kiddushay Kesef. It seems like from Rashi, and we're going to see all three of these cases are a bit strange. Rashi seems to think that each of these, because they exist as archetypical transactions, they work. Because it works in Arev, it should work for Kiddushin. Because it works by Eved Kanani, it should also work for Kiddushin.
That doesn't really make much
So that
sense.
doesn't make a lot of sense, and the later Rishonim are troubled by that. The Rush thinks that the process by which the Kiddushay Kesef are affected is the transfer of this money. Money was transferred, and
The
that's
wrong
all
way.
you need for Kiddushin. Fine. Let's say whatever we want about the fact that it was the wrong way or between the wrong parties, but money was transferred.
So what?
So that means that Kiddushin is not about making a purchase, it's about the formal act of transfer is attached to the Kiddushin.
No, but
Oh, Mike, wait, 1 sec. That's the Rush.
Why is it the wrong way? If somebody wants to.
It's the wrong way because the woman gets no benefit, and it's the wrong way because the
woman's
husband
getting-
doesn't lose anything. So 1 sec. So the Rambam's approach, and this is, I think, perhaps the most reasonable, is that the way in which the woman is getting married in this case is the fact that either she agrees to do what the husband asked her, and the benefit that gets back and forth there.
It's
This
not
is
articulated though.
so it's unarticulated. So, well, 1 second. So the Rambam's point there is that the psychological benefit of one person listening to another
Right.
person's financial recommendations or trusting another person in a financial matter, that's usually worth a pruta, minimal amount of value. So that would be what makes the Kiddushay Kesef work in this case. That is a psychological value, which comes up much later in the Masechta as well. That is, you do a dance for me and I'll be married to you, or things like that. All of those kinds of intangible values are nonetheless good for Kiddushin. That's the Rambam's approach. It does have the problem, like Michael was saying, that it's not articulated. Rashi here inserts the fact, and some of the other Rishonim as well, that actually all of this needs to be articulated clearly. Otherwise, it's not what it's her handing a $100 bill to someone else. It's not connected to Kiddushin at all. So that's part of the problem. And the Ritva kind of takes some kind of a middle approach where he says it is a monetary aspect of the fact that money was transferred, but some part of that is still linked back to the psychological aspect as well. It gets a little bit tricky to figure out, and that's part of the point here, that these are very strange cases.
What I also don't understand is that it says Ekadesh Lach. Isn't that like already a no-no? Because it's ki kach isha, lo kach ish, you know.
I'm
isha
sorry.
ish.
Well, we're going to get to that as well.
Yeah.
But so that case is going to come up later, which is an even more precise formulation of that. We're going to see exactly why, and that's part of why this is so important as a contrast to what we saw yesterday and the day before, which is that although there is a restriction on the woman making the transfer to the man, we're going to see exactly a case which is parallel to that, where the woman gives a gift to the man, and nonetheless it does work.
Well, because he's
So we're gonna have to get to that.
on
One second, we're going to have to get to that in just a second.
No, but what he said, I'm going to try to understand this, because what he said, according to this, is you give money to so and so, I'll be mukudah.
Sorry, right? I changed. Right, the woman says 10 mane leplay. I'm sorry, I changed. I got it right the first time. This is why you should trust your notes. The woman says to the man 10 mane leploni,
Right.
ve'akadesh ani lach.
Right.
She will marry to him.
Right.
Right. That's the first case. That's din arev. Din arev, the money transfers from the husband to Ploni. The husband still loses money. The woman does not gain any money, but nonetheless, she gained the psychological value that the husband listened to her in this financial regard.
I was going to say the analogy that Ariv to me is that anytime the fact that we have Arivim in the world, people who are willing to support a loan while receiving nothing, shows that there are people who want loans to happen,
right,
even if it doesn't affect them,
right,
and are willing to put their interest at stake to
right,
make that loan happen.
Right.
So
either if it's for someone who they care about, who
right,
gives them some.
the idea that a
right,
loan happening is something somebody would want and sacrifice for,
right,
is obvious.
But he didn't say anything.
The husband in this case has not said anything. The woman comes to the husband and says, give a maneh to Ploni and I will marry you. And that works midin arev. The question of whether the husband has to say when he gives the money to Ploni, Harei at mekudeshet li behana'ad, that you listen to me for giving the money.
That's what he's saying.
According to the Rambam, that's implicit. according to Rashi, he has to say something. It's a bit complicated.
It's
Okay, the next case. Yes.
There's some element of her actually receiving the money because, say, she owed this fellow money. Phony.
Okay, that's a separate issue. That's paying back a loan or something else. It
Right.
seems here there are no other strings attached. Otherwise, it would be
Okay, so I mean,
more
on some
straightforward.
conceptual level, though,
Right.
she's receiving it in the sense of that he's giving his money
to someone else. Okay, so it has to be psychological
through
aspect.
her,
Right.
through her, though. Right.
Right. Okay, the next case is on the fourth line. In this case, Heilach mana v'hidkadeshi liploni. So what happens? The man, Heilach mana v'hidkadeshi liploni. That is, the woman says, take this money and I will be married to Ploni. So let's call it here, this is the husband. So she's speaking with who we're calling Ploni, and she says, if I give you the money, this is the case we thought we had before, take this money from me, v'itkadeshi liploni. I will be married to someone else. Okay? And that is going to work what's called midin eved kanani. Helach mana v'itkadeshi liploni mikudeshet midin eved kanani. Because what? When a slave buys his own freedom, the halacha is that a slave, everything that a slave owns is really owned by the master. So therefore the slave can't actually buy his own freedom, because any money that he'll have is going to, if someone gives him the money to go buy his own freedom, it will already belong to the master. Therefore, for a slave to buy his own freedom, someone else has to play a third role to pay the purchase price from the slave master.
So I understand the lashon here. It's Halech v'hit kachi. It should be v'ekadesh, right? Is that what you're saying?
No.
You be married to Ploni, right? Sorry,
This is the man.
keep mixing them up.
Yeah, the man.
Okay, the man says, Heilach mana v'hit kadeshi liploni.
Oh, the
That
man
is,
says it. Okay.
he says to her, take this money. Right. The direction was reversed. The man says, the third party man says, here's $100, be married to someone else. So if he were his shaliach, that would be great. That would just be regular shlichut. Here, this is not a case of shaliach. This is a case where this guy knows about this.
Obviously, yeah, he has to
And
agree to it too.
Obviously, he has to agree to it, but that in whatever sense, the money being transferred is, the husband is not losing any money.
And he doesn't have to pay him back. He doesn't have to pay Ploni back.
Charlie,
If the husband had appointed the guy to shliach, this wouldn't even be.
right, exactly. It wouldn't even be a chiddush. So there's no, it's not by shlichut. So medin eved kanani, lavav al gav de lo kachaser velo midi. The eved kanani, in buying his own freedom, does not lose any money because someone else has to purchase his freedom for him. Velo midi kakani nafshe. Hi gavranami afal gav de lo kachaser velo midi. So too, just like this man, the man who's getting married, did not lose any money. So it's a comparable case to the slave who, when the slave buys his own freedom, does not lose any money because someone else.
To someone else, though. Like it's not.
So, but that's the analogous case is that a person can make a transaction in which they do not lose any money. Someone else can spend all the money, and it can still be your transaction.
Effect a change of status.
Right.
Effect a change of status.
Okay, so that's our second case, and now the third case, Tain mane leploni ve'kadesh ani lo. So the woman tells the husband, Ten mane leploni ve'akadesh ani lo. So this ploni is paying the husband, and she told him, Ten mane leploni ve'akadesh ani lo. Give money from you to the person I want to marry, and that works midin shnehem. It works from both combined. That is, the woman does not get any money. The husband does not lose any money. That is, the husband is even actually gaining money, and nonetheless, it works. So how does that work? The Gemara just spells it out explicitly. Ten mana leploni ve'kadesh ani lo mikudeshet midin shnehem. It works from both. Arev laf al gav daf al gav lo ka mati hana liyadei kamishabed nafshe. It works by arev because you can make a transaction, or you can make a change in status by, even if you don't get any hana. Hay ititanami af al gav lo ka mati hana liyada. So the woman does not get any money, and nonetheless she obligates herself. So then the second part of the problem is that the husband didn't lose any money, and Eved Kanani comes to prove it. And Eved Kanani halo kachaser mamona v'kakani nafshe. And so the Eved Kanani case is that the slave does not lose any, does not gain. The slave does not lose any money. So too here, the husband has not lost any money. So then it's just the same problem in reverse, and then both combined. So those are the three cases. That is, we had first the case of Arev, where in the case of Arev, the woman does not get any money. The woman asked the man to give money to someone else, and that works because she has some psychological benefit. The second Eved Knani case is that someone else gave the woman the money, and the husband still marries her because even though he did not spend any money, it doesn't have to be his money that's spent on the Kiddushin. And then the third case, combining them both, the woman does not get any money and the husband does not spend any money, and nonetheless the Kiddushin does work. Now we have a fourth case. And this is the case that Michael was alluding to earlier, which is in some sense the most problematic, considering the Gemara that we already had on Daf Hey. The Gemara says, by Rava. Rava asked a question. We're just going to see. By Rava, Heilach mana v'kadesh ani lecha. What if the woman says, here is the money to the man. She's giving the money to the man, and she says, and I will be married to you.
It's technically like a hitpa'el ikadesh.
Ikadesh, right?
Yeah.
So ve'ikadesh ani lach mahu. Amar Mar Zutra mishmei de Rav Papa. Mekudeshet. Mar Zutra says it works for Kiddushin.
Wow.
Amar le Rav Ashi le Mar Zutra. Rav Ashi responds, Im kain havi alei nechasim sheyesh lamachrayis niknim nechasim she'ein lamachrayis. V'anan ibchatnan nechasim she'ein lamachrayis niknim nechasim sheyesh lamachrayis. Because of Bishtar b'chazaka. This is a Mishnah that's coming up. And there's a kinyan called agav. Agav is when I'm purchasing a field and there is a washing machine sitting in the field.
Yeah.
So when you buy the field, which are called nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus, that is, they have liabilities and liens imposed on them because it's real estate. So real estate, when you buy a piece of land, if there are movable objects on top, those can be bought along with it. So if I buy a field with 500 sheep on it, I can buy the sheep along with whatever kinyan I'm using on the field. I write a star to buy the field, and the sheep come along for the ride.
You have to specify that.
You do have to specify it in the purchase agreement, but the kinyanim that work to buy sheep have to be Meshicha or Hagba or something like that. But you could use a star to buy sheep if you're buying them agav. That is, you buy a piece of land, and along with the land comes all the sheep. So that's called nechasim she'ein lahem achrayus niknin agav nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus. Movable objects or small scale purchase can go along for the ride with real estate. The problem is that it seems like when the woman is giving the man money is metaltlin, money is movable objects. So it seems like she is selling herself to him, so to say, along, that is agav, the money. The money is the primary transfer, and then she is transferring the Kiddushin.
I'm buying the flock, and I'm getting the field along with
and
the
that's
sheep.
the opposite of how the Mishnah teaches agav, and that's exactly the question then that Mar Zutra responds. Mar Zutra says, Amar le, mi savarta Amar le agav. Who said I'm talking about kinyan agav? Hacha ba'adam chashuv askinan. We're talking about a very important person. Rashi describes for us an Adam Chashuv. And Adam Chashuv is someone who does not like to receive gifts based on the pasuk in Mishlei, Sonei Matanot Yichye, which is a principle employed by Chazal regularly, which is that a person who refuses gifts is a very praiseworthy thing. So Adam Chashuv askinan debehahi hana dekam mekabel hana mina gamra umekani lenafsha. The hana that she gets from the fact that such an Adam Chashuv, who does not normally accept gifts, has accepted her gift, that is worth to her 1 pruta. If you're going to take the president of the United States out for dinner, and you're paying the check, but he went out to dinner with you, that's still worth pruta to you. That's the idea.
But so is that the same case with Rabba's first case? Tin mane leponovic.
It is similar to that case in that what's being talked about here is a psychological hana of a minimal value, in that a person is doing something that they might not ordinarily have done.
Because you have to know that this person would not normally have done that in Rob's first case, right?
So that's part of the question as well. That in the earlier case, what was being discussed is Arev, which is a more general financial business agreement where the benefit is relatively well known. With Adam Chashuv, it's less common that a person would get any hana from the fact that you accepted my gift. It happens, but it has to be with particular people. Charlie has a question.
So this would seem to permit a reverse spring ceremony.
But it would only work in a case of someone who is an Adam Chashuv who regularly refuses gifts. So if you're such a person who regularly, which is very, very few of us. Now again, it depends. Sometimes there are people who get a benefit or a hana from giving lots of people gifts. There are people who like to give gifts. So how can we assess the psychological value that a person would place on liking to give gifts? That becomes complicated. But yeah.
But I don't understand that. What do you mean? Like, in other words, my wife, let's say, has enough, right? I have to be Adam Chashuv. She has enough from seeing me wear this ring. What does that have to do with it?
Okay, so that's also part of it, is that almost in any kind of a gift-giving situation between people who care about each other, the fact that you got person the gift and they're happy to get it, then that makes you happy also. But it's complicated. It's hard to put a cash value on that, which is complicated.
But it's like the MasterCard thing, priceless. You don't have to put
but
it is priceless.
But so when we talk about
there's much more.
I don't know.
It's the rest of your life.
It's complicated. It's true. It's complicated. It's complicated to make it work in real life in a precise way.
And maybe if you want to make it work in real life, you need to specify, I'm not marrying you through the receipt of this, or she's not marrying you through giving me this. We're getting married through the hana that's at hand. And in this case, you don't need to specify the hana because it's clear to everyone. Oh my gosh, giving this person a gift. Right. You're getting something from it. But
you got to give the king a gift. That's real hana, right?
Right. When you go and you see the president and you give him something from your country, that's great.
The hana is the opportunity you had.
Right. So there you don't need to specify. Maybe we could have cases with regular people there, you definitely need to specify it.
Is that
true? You don't need to specify anything?
I don't know about that. Again, it's complicated. It depends on how well known it is. I'm sure.
Here, there's no
There's no explicit. Right.
But you said the Rambam read it into the first case also. So
the Rambam reads the psychological aspect into the first case. It's complicated here. Here, it's the Gemara is explicit about that psychological value, and it comes up in other sugyot later in the second and third paragraph.
I mean, but then having to express it. Are we saying that you don't even need to express the psychological value that I'm getting? I know you're Adam Chashuv. That you don't.
I don't know. We have to continue because we're going to fall behind otherwise. Okay. Idbar Nami Mishmei de Rava. There's another case that came up in the name of Rava. It's interesting now that Rava taught 3 cases. Then Rava asked a question about one case that was answered by Mar Zutra later. And now we have a member of Rava, which presumably applies to the first 3 cases. What does Rava say? Mar Nami Mishmei de Rava. V'chein le'inyan mamona. All of these mechanisms, that is Arev, Eved Knani, Din Shnehem, and presumably, or perhaps not, the Adam Chashuv case, those cases would apply in monetary transactions as well. That is, if you want to employ as kesef kinyan for buying a field, which only needs to be 1 pruta, if you want that pruta to be based on one of these funny business kind of mechanisms, you could still do that as well. But it would become tricky to make it work in real life. Vitzricha, we needed to hear that from Rava. The Iyashmin and Kiddushin Mishum the Hayitani Chale Bekoldehu, Kideresh Lakish Tamar Shlakish Tabu Metav Tandim Metav Armelo. So maybe we would have thought that Rava only taught these in a case of Kiddushin because the necessary threshold of Kesef Kiddushin is relatively low. It's only 1 pruta, and it's something that could even be psychological, and even in any case there, because of the presumption that many women generally, or most women, want to get married. The question of how that gets applied and misapplied in contemporary cases and has been employed in a variety of ways is very complex. But suffice it to say, Reish Lakish said, Tav l'meitav tandum l'meitav armelo, it's better to be married than it is to be single, which I think generally the Jewish tradition at least does have a positive view of being married, so there is that. However, how does that impact marital law becomes more complicated. We wouldn't say it by monetary transactions where the threshold is perhaps higher. Mamona, that is monetary cases, there's room for mechila. You can not pay anything. A person can just say, whatever, don't worry about the purchase price. Arba me'ot shekel kesef, right? Have a gift, right? Okay. About Kiddushin, but Kiddushin, there's no room for mechila. You can't just say, whatever, don't worry about the kesef Kiddushin, because then there's no formal transaction that serves to create the Kiddushin. Kiddushin has to be with some kind of a transaction and not just with the consent of both parties, that we'll see later on in the Masechta as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ketubah is given at the Kiddushin, right?
Ketubah is a chiyuv at the time of nisuin.
At the nisuin, okay.
Yeah.
So she knows still she's going to get her 200 zuz, right?
Well, the 200 zuz obligation, at least as Chazal impose it, is only if the husband predeceases his wife, or in the case of divorce. But she doesn't really get any real money until that happens. She does get the shtar, which is worth that much.
So she'll have even though here she's not receiving anything of substantial.
Right, we have to separate the Kiddushin from the Nisuin.
She's still expecting she's going to have some security. Security through that ketubah, right?
She knows that in a technical sense. I'm not sure it impacts any of this in any real way. That is, it's seen as a totally separate process. It's totally independent kind of transaction, and there's we can talk about that more later. But that's part of. I think Rabbi Linzer even spoke about the misconception that the ketubah in some way serves as a shtar kiddushin, and it really doesn't. It's totally for a separate process of the marriage, which is connected to the nisuin. But it's a good question. So Amar Rava, hikadshi lila chatziyai, be married to half of me. A man goes to a woman and says, be married to half of me. Mekudeshet. That does work. She is married to him. Chetziech mekudeshet li, half of you, half of the woman, be married to me, the man, eina mekudeshet. She is not married. Amar le'abai l'Rava, ma'ishna chetziech mekudeshet li, de'eina mekudeshet. Isha marachmana velo chatzi isha, hachanami isha marachmana velo chatzi ish. Abaye's question to Rava is, wait a second. If the whole reason why it doesn't work to marry half a woman is because the Torah said, ki yikach ish isha, when a man marries a woman, it means a whole woman, so too, it says ish, so it should mean a whole man as well. So Rava responds, don't tell me psukim, I'm talking about svaras. Amar le, hachi hasha, hatam itzdela beitrei lo chazia, a woman cannot be married to two men, and therefore the implication of the statement, half of you be married to me, is that he's leaving over the other half of this woman to marry another man, which is forbidden. Ele gavra, milo chazia le beitrei, but in the time of the Gemara, polygamy, which is in a technical sense allowed, if a man says half of me be married to you, what he's saying is I reserve the right in our marriage to marry another woman, which would be allowed and it would work. So an interesting question to consider also, this is not actually what they're talking about. The man is not saying only half of me is married to you. He's using it as an idiom to express his intent for polygamy. And in fact, it's interesting to question how much in entering into a polygamous relationship does a man need to have stipulated that as part of the terms of the initial relationship or not. Here it sounds like he's marrying this woman on an explicit condition that he plans to marry a second wife. So it's interesting to consider that.
So all of you will be Mekudeshet to me on Mondays and Thursdays.
Well, Mondays and Thursdays becomes more problematic. Just to think about the time is different than saying half and half. Okay. Now, if I want to marry another woman, I can. Amar le mar zutra bre dirav meri l'ravina. So when he says half of you be married to me, why can't we say then a principle imported from the laws of hekdesh, of sacrifices? Why doesn't the holiness, the kedusha of the marriage spread through her entire body? That is, he only married quote unquote half of her, and nonetheless it should spread to her entire self. If you go to an animal and say the leg of this animal is an ola, tehe kula ola, then the whole animal should be an ola. Even the opinion that's a machlokes in Maseches Temura, and there's an opinion that it does not work if you say the leg. That's because you made hekdesh something that the animal could survive without. That is a leg. If you amputate the animal's leg, it could still survive. However, if you say the heart of this animal is an ola, the whole animal is an ola. The brain of this animal is an ola, the whole animal is an ola. And that becomes because if the animal could not survive without it, then the entire life of the animal is included. And now you would say the same thing should apply. That is, if you would say half of this animal, if you split the animal in half down the middle, the animal would not survive. Therefore, it should be able to spread to the entire animal. And it's just a strange way of saying it. So we have to distinguish now between Kiddushin and Hekdesh. And what's the difference? No, there's a fundamental difference between marriage and sacrifices, and that is when you make an animal sanctified for the altar, what you're doing is designating a totally inanimate, I mean, it's animate, an animal can walk around, but it does not have consciousness. An animal is not a bardat. In the case of marriage, the woman is consenting and agreeing to the marriage, particularly as articulated by the husband at the time of the Kiddushin. That is, we saw earlier in the Masechta a few days ago, the notion that at the time of Kiddushin, the husband has to articulate a verbal declaration of what his intent is. And the woman's consent is consent to that statement. So therefore, if the man says, Chetziech mekudeshet li, half of you is married to me, she could be agreeing only to half, and therefore it does not work, and would not allow the Kiddusha to spread through her as if in the same way that it would work for an animal, where an animal has no consciousness to resist that. It's important to note the question of the role of the woman's das, obviously here, has a very high value in terms of determining how far the Kiddushin can work and in which ways Kiddushin could be affected. Even here, she seems to be relatively agreeing to the marriage, but nonetheless, because the husband articulated in a certain way, and that's what she agreed to, it would block the effectiveness of the Kiddushin. A few points to make before we get into the next part of the sugya, which is a bit technical. There are some interesting machlokot here between Rashi and Tosfos about some of the issues we saw. Tosfos and Rashi disagree about how much we saw with the question of Kinyan Agav. The Hava Amina in the Gemara was that Kinyan Agav could be compared when you purchase land and you purchase, say, cattle who are on the land, compared to when the woman is transferring the money, and that she herself is connected to that. So Rashi says, oh, it's because we know, in general, human beings are in a certain sense comparable to land in transactional cases. And Tosfos says, no. We know that slaves are comparable to land. Slaves are like real estate because of a pasuk that declares that, but it doesn't apply to free people in the same way at all. It's not, we wouldn't conceptualize people as property at all, is Tosfos' suggestion. And the Shach in Shulchan Aruch brings many proofs against Tosfos, as is his often his way to do, that he becomes convinced of one position and he'll bring everything he thinks is a proof against it. But it's really an important question to think about when we say that there's a hekesh between slaves and property. Does that transfer to free people as well in a conceptual sense or not? Okay, let's continue. So, okay, okay, so that's the case. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we said there was a case of das acheres, halo damya. So that's why they're not similar. Ella lahad Amar Rabbi Yochanan behema shel shnei shutfin. No, let's compare the case of a woman marrying a woman to a case of an animal that is owned by two partners. And hikdish chetzia, one of the partners makes hekdesh, makes ready for sacrifice. Now here it can't be a sacrifice because only half an animal, we're going to see. So it has to be only as monetary donation. Is makdish half of the animal, his half, v'chozer v'lakcha, and then he buys the other half from the other business partner, v'hikdisha, and then he makes the other half hekdesh, kiddusha, then it is hekdesh, it is kedosha, ve'ena kreva, you cannot bring it as a sacrifice because it is really two half animals glued together. Conceptually, what has happened? The person made one half hekdesh, he didn't own the other half, then he bought the other half, and then he made the other half hekdesh. So it's two halves, it's not a whole animal. Ena kreva, ve'oset tmura, it can be used to make a tmura, which is complex. That is, the laws of tmura, the laws of exchanging animals, which is a prohibition in the Torah, but it works. That is, if I have an animal which is hekdesh, and I say, that other sheep should take the kedusha from this sheep, they're both holy, that is, they both have kedusha. So that only works if the animal had kedushat haguf. So here, on the one hand, ena kreva, because it's really like two halves. At the same time, it's kadosh enough to make a tmura. So it's in limbo. It's in a halfway state. U'tmurata kayotzeba. And the tmura that you would make is also ena kreva. It also cannot be brought as a sacrifice because the tmura itself is also two halves. So that's an interesting point. Shema mina atlat. We learned three things from this. Interesting to note, throughout Shas, whenever you have a shema mina with a number, it's always shema mina talat. You can only learn three things from something. You don't have shema mina trey, you don't have shema mina arba. It's always shema mina talat, probably as a mnemonic point. Sometimes two of the points are very similar to each other. Shema mina talat, shema mina balei chaim nidchim. Animals can be pushed aside. That is, if, and this is the question about dichui. Dichui means an animal that was disqualified at some point after becoming hekdesh, or even, we're going to see, shema mina dichui me'ikara havi dichui. Or even if its initial state of being hekdesh was that it was uneligible to be sacrificed, nonetheless, that counts as dichui. That means an animal which had a flaw, and then the flaw resolved itself, nonetheless remains. That would be the case of the tmura. That is, once the hekdesh case, the whole animal is kadosh, you try to make a tmura, the tmura is still a problem. Shema mina yesh dichui bedamim. And there's even dichui, that is even disqualification of the animal in a case where the hekdesh was Kiddushat damim, that is value hekdesh, and not Kiddushat haguf, intrinsic bodily hekdesh in the animal to be brought as sacrifice.
So how does that work? Does that mean, let's say the animal is then sold, does that mean the money can't be used for korbanot?
Well, the animal will be sold by the Beit HaMikdash, and the money would be used for korbanot. That means, but right, so that's different. That means here it's Kiddushat damim. It's two halves, and you go and sell it, and they're poded the Kiddusha, and that would be fine.
But an animal that is consecrated with Kiddushin Damim typically isn't going to be sacrificed anyway.
Correct. Here the case was he tried to make it Kiddushat Haguf. That's the whole point about the Tamura case.
Ah,
Oset Tamura indicates that it really is Kiddushat Haguf. But it's Kiddushat Haguf of a case that is deeply flawed kind of Kiddushat Haguf. Okay. So by Rava. Now Rava is going to ask a number of cases, and all of these are ambiguous cases, but they're getting into the question of what sort of transaction, what sort of transfer is necessary for the Kiddushin, and we're going to see. So by Rava, a man goes to the woman and says, half of you be married to me with half pruta, and the other half be married to me with the other half of the pruta. Now, let's think about this for a second. There's no such thing as a half pruta. A pruta is the smallest coin. So when you say a half pruta, you're obviously counting up to something. That's one possibility. Or is the fact that you said half a problem? Machlokes Rishonim also, what's the problem that the word half is saying? Is it half a woman, which we already saw is problematic, or is it chatzi pruta, that there's no real money here? Two half prutas, in a sense, does not add up to a whole pruta because there's no such coin as a half pruta. So let's see. So by Rava,
the problem of a half human being, in other words, like neshama ain't tluya, like your hand.
No, it would be. Oh,
like your hand will be mekudeshet. So you can't do that.
No, it's not. It's a special exclusion.
The bar dot is the exclusion.
Right, exactly. It's special exclusion by Kiddushin. It's not because of neshama tuluya or not neshama tuluya.
Bar dot.
Right, it's because she wouldn't be consenting to it.
Right.
Okay, so by Rabba chatziach b'chatzi pruta v'chatziach b'chatzi pruta mahu. What should be the case? Rava is talking out loud. Kevan da'amar la chatzi pruta. The fact that he said half a pruta, but other Girsos just say kevan da'amar la chetzi. So chetzi paska. It stops. That is, it's two separate transactions, which each one of them is invalid and therefore wouldn't work. Odilma mone v'holechu. He's counting up. That is, he first said half and then he said the other half, and it just builds up. That's the way he was counting it out in his head. He said, okay, half and then the other half. Okay, so mone v'holechu, and that should be fine. Im timtzilomar mone v'holechu chatzye. So then, if you'll admit to me the case that mone v'holechu and that it should work. What if he tries to do the same thing, but now using two prutas instead of one pruta? Half be married to me with one pruta and half with another pruta. The fact that he said one pruta, which is actually a considerable value, rather than half pruta, which is not considered to be valuable, that would split the two statements, and therefore it would not work. Odilma kol peyome mone v'holechu, or anything that happens in the same day. I'm not sure it really means the same day. I'll explain in a minute.
It's like a bichte sheyasu.
Except that we know from the end of Nedarim that by Kiddushin there's no such thing as toch kedei dibur. That is, Kiddushin has to be in one moment. It can't be even stretched across a minimal length of time. So Kiddushin, or there, maybe that's different. Maybe here you're actually adding two positive pieces together to make a single transaction, rather than there, the question of toch kedei dibur is about retracting your statement. So to retract the statement, maybe you don't have the power, but maybe you do have the power to combine, to accrue individual pieces of the interaction together. So then the next case, and if you'll admit to me that case, that's correct. What about I marry half of you today, half tomorrow? And we would think at this point it's getting pretty absurd. It sounds like it really wouldn't work. Okay, the fact that you said tomorrow, already that totally separates it. The marriage starts now, but he's trying to conceptually draw out what is really an instantaneous interaction. That is Kiddushin. He gives her the pruta and she accepts it, and that's it. That should be an instantaneous interaction, and it's really, he's trying to draw it out now across 2 different days. It's interesting also just to think the fact that they're thinking about it day by day rather than in minutes and hours, which they also know about. It's interesting that sort of it's very coarsely grained time scale. So interesting to think about. What if a person goes to the woman and says, your 2 halves be married to me with this one pruta? That is a single transaction. So he said it in one time, and it should work. Odilma ein isha mitkadeshet lechatzayin klal. A woman cannot ever be married by halvesies. That is, the whole notion of saying even two halves is not the same as you, the person, be married to me. It's somehow indicates a flaw in his conception of what marriage is about, or perhaps she's not agreeing to what he's proposing the same way because she doesn't understand what he means. So let's think about it there. Yes.
That is we've compared, in some cases, marriage to taking an eved. So this is an example where it's very different because you can't have an eved being owned by two different people.
You can, yes. But that's exactly the point, is that marital relationship is fundamentally between a man and a woman in this case. And so what's being described is not a business partnership by any means that could be compared to two people going to buy a slave. It's very different in the notion of how. So even though there are parallels, and even though the way the Gemara creates halacha is by drawing analogy between cases that are close enough to be compared, but nonetheless there are really major distinctions between obviously buying a slave and getting married.
But I just can't quite figure out what a marriage is.
Of course not. We have at least 80 more pages, right, to figure it out. 70 more pages.
This should have been the first.
But it's the shortest.
Section.
Okay, so let's continue. By Rava. So Rava now. And that all ends with teku. That is, all of the cases we just saw are not unresolved cases. We know that the general principle is that many of the Rishonim try to later determine how to paskin. The Rambam, as far as I know, always paskins l'chumra in cases of teku. Of course, I said always. Probably there are some exceptions, and it depends how do you read the Gemara.
All the ones
like
you've seen.
Well, I don't know. There's somehow a sense of a rule that the Rambam has there that teku means we don't know, so you have to be machmir. Okay. By Rava, shnei benotayich lishnei banai bepruta. A man who has been appointed a shaliach by his two sons to go get them married off. It can't be that he's just doing it against their will, because there's no such thing as a husband marrying off his son as an agent by the Torah. It has to be that the sons actually appointed him. But the father of two boys goes to the father of two underage girls and says, your two daughters be married to my two sons, bipruta, with one pruta. Mahu batar notenu mikabel azlinan. Do we go by the people who are having the interaction, which makes it, in a certain sense, less financial? That is, a single pruta affects Kiddushin in a general sense. The ha'ika mamona, and there is a piece of money being transferred here. Odilma batar didhu azlinan the ha'leka. Or do we go by the men and women who are themselves getting married, and therefore that there's not enough? There's only one pruta for two marriages, and that's not enough. Teku, we don't know. Okay. By Rav Papa, bitcha paratcha bepruta mahu, a case where a person goes to buy a cow and also wants to marry someone's daughter, and says with a single pruta. Now we're going to see what the question is. Mi amrinan bitcha b'chatzi pruta paratcha b'chatzi pruta. Are you really saying marry your daughter with half a pruta and buy the cow for half a pruta? Oh, Dilma, bitcha bepruta, the kesef kiddushin is by one pruta. Uparatcha b'meshicha. You just sort of said them both together, but really they're two fundamentally different transactions. And again, part of the question here is Chazal wrestling with the question of the fact they know that kiddushin comes in a context of kinyanim and purchases, but they're at the same time problematizing and to a certain extent undermining some of that process as well.
It's a para agav isha.
No, it's two separate transactions.
Well, it could be conceptualized as one.
You could, but they don't say that. They say
agav.
Mashiach. They didn't say agav. Because again, Tosfot told us agav would work with slaves, but not with getting married. Right?
Yeah, but it's the para that I'm interested in, not the woman. So it could have been agav, right? It could have been the para as agav.
No, because the agav, that's what Tosfos' point says, is that you can't say agav by kiddushin in the same way that you would say agav by buying a slave. Agav is a principle that works by karka,
right,
and it's extended to slaves, but Tosfos says it doesn't extend to getting married.
Oh, okay.
Okay, teku, also resolve teku. By Rav Ashi, bitcha v'karka bepruta. So now we're sort of closer than marriage and a cow because they're in different classes, so to say, of purchase. But like we said, there is a closer connection between human beings and land in a certain sense. So Rav Ashi's question, marry your daughter and buy your field with one pruta. Mahu bitcha b'chatzi pruta v'karkacha b'chatzi pruta. Is he saying half and half of the pruta? Odilma bitcha b'pruta v'karkacha b'chazaka. Or, no, I want to buy the field by building a fence, knocking down the fence, plowing it, walking along the land. That's a totally different mechanism of kinyan for the field. Teku. Hahuav Gavra de Akdish Beshirai. There was a man who wanted to get married using a piece of silk. Now, how much is silk worth?
back then it was a fortune because
So silk is very
we hadn't
valuable.
snuck the silkworms out of China yet.
This is true. So silk is very expensive. However, how much is silk worth? You go to the marketplace. Do you know how much silk costs? Okay, so that's gonna be our question. Rabba Amar lo tzricha shuma. Rabba says it does not need to be evaluated for its value. That is, we know that it's valuable. We know that it's certainly worth a pruta. So who cares? Doesn't matter how much it's actually worth. Okay. Rav Yosef Amar tzricha shuma. Rav Yosef says it does need to be evaluated. Why? Because the woman is consenting to the marriage on the condition that it's worth a certain amount. This becomes the basis for the fact that we are machmir to use only particular kinds of wedding rings. That is, those that could be, to a certain extent, evaluated accurately. That is, a plain metal ring without perforations and artistic decorations and things like that, or gemstones, because the value of gemstones is a very broad range. A person might think, oh, this is a real diamond, and really it's glass or cubic zirconia or something else that's worth less. And therefore, the woman would not have consented to the marriage. She was only consenting because she thought the ring was worth $50,000, and really it's worth $5,000. So that's a big difference. Okay, so Ida Amar La Bekoldehu Kule Amalupli. Everyone agrees that if the man, even when he gives her the piece of silk, says, if you'll agree to be married to me, Bekoldehu, with a minimal value, that is, with a Shaveh Pruta within this silk tapestry. You know the silk tapestry is certainly worth more than that, but just agree to marry me as if it's worth only a pruta. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees it does not need to be assessed. So Ida Amar La Chamshin v'lo shavu chamshin, because if he had said it was worth 50 and it really wasn't worth 50, halo shavu. So and if it wasn't and so then everyone would agree that in that case, because he was misleading her. If he said explicitly that it's worth 50 and it wasn't actually worth 50, so halo shavu. It wasn't worth that much. Kipligi, so the machlokas between Rabbi and Rav Yosef is in a case, Kipligi the Amar Chamshin v'shavu Chamshin. He said it's worth 50 and it was worth 50. But the problem was that she probably didn't know about it. Rabbi Amar lo tzrichei shuma, the half shavu Chamshin. Rabbi says it was worth 50. So it's fine. He said it was worth 50 and then it was worth 50. So she agreed to it and it was correct. So it's fine, no problem. Rav Yosef Amar tzrichei shuma. It needs to be assessed. Kevan de itita lo bekia b'shuma. A woman, a normal woman, doesn't know how much silk is worth. Lo samchadata, so she wouldn't have really agreed to it, and therefore, because she didn't really agree to it, that would be a problem in terms of moving forward with the Kiddushin, even though it turns out later to have been worth as much as the husband suggested. Some questions?
It's not a question. I just looked up. Silk silk itself didn't even make it to the Middle East until the 4th century, which is why these would be rather late on Mariam.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. Right, Rabbi and Rav Yosef already now in the 4th generation.
Right,
So
and silkworms did not make it till the 6th century, which was after the time of the Talmud.
That's perfect. So it's exactly, they're dealing with iPads and Kindles and everything, contemporary technology being introduced right in their time. They have exactly the question. There's this expensive stuff I heard about that we don't really know how much it's worth. It's very valuable. It comes from China. So who knows? We have to deal with it as it comes.
Okay. It was made in China, they said.
Made in China. Back then, that was really a worthwhile thing.
They had made it to Japan a few hundred years earlier.
Well, that makes sense. Okay. So, Ikeda Amri Bekolde Hunami Pli. There are those that is a different approach to this whole sugya. Ikeda Amri is a later gloss on the Talmud, which is usually considered to be authoritative. Ikeda Amri Bekolde Hunami Pli. They even disagree when the man said, "Be married to me with a single pruta's value within this silk object." Rav Yosef Amar Shaveh Pruta Harehu Kekesef. So Rav Yosef says a Shaveh Pruta, the fact that you're getting married with Shaveh Pruta, worth of a single Pruta, is like money. And what is a quality of money? Ma Kesef decays. Kesef is precisely measured value. A coin is a coin. A nickel is worth 5 cents, and I know that every nickel I have. But if you're telling me, here's a huge piece of silk that I'm giving you, it's beautiful, it's valuable, it's very valuable, be married to me with a single pruta's value within this, the woman doesn't know how much silk that is. It's not a precise measurement. So, af shaveh kesef nami dekayitz, shaveh kesef, something which is property, which is worth money, even when it's used for kiddushay kesef, has to be precisely designated how much is being used. Otherwise, a person would be confused. So, Amar Rav Yosef, mana min Allah, how do I know this? Titania mikesef miknato. So this is a discussion here about a Maser Sheni. So Maser Sheni, I think, right? No, Eved Ivri. I'm sorry. So the case of Eved Ivri, that is a Jewish person indentures himself to 6 years of servitude in order to either pay back a debt that he could not pay, which is the case of Mecharuhu Beitin, or he's very poor, Mocher Atzmo. He needs the money, so he goes and indentures himself and gets a pretty good business deal in terms of the values that are being discussed. So, and that evaluation is Mikesef Miknato. When Eved Ivri goes to buy back his indentured servitude, that is after a certain number of years, maybe he doesn't want to work all 6 years, he saved up the money, so now he wants to buy off the rest of his time, and he has to use Kesef Miknato. The Kesef hu nikneh eino nikneh betvua v'kelim. You could not use either produce, that is fruits and vegetables and grain and all sorts of things, or kelim, farm tools, merchandise, all sorts of things. Hai tvua v'kelim heichidami. So what's the problem with tvua and kelim? Ilema delo mikne behu klal. So maybe you'll say that you could not use them to purchase anything at all, but we see Yashiv Geulato, the rest of the pasuk does allow them in other kinds of contexts. So Amar Rachmana l'rabot shaveh kesef kekesef. So the phrase Yashiv Geulato in the rest of the pasuk comes to include shaveh kesef, things which are worth money. Kekesef, that is to equate barter with purchase. I deleit behu shaveh pruta. What if they're worth less than shveh pruta ma'iriyat to have a kalim? So it won't work. Afilu kasef nami. You wouldn't even be able to use money less than a shveh pruta. There is no such money that's less than shveh pruta. Ella lav. Rather, it's not what we're talking about. To eat behu shveh pruta, they are worth more than a pruta. They do have a substantial value. The kavan de lo kaitzi lo. And because the problem with Tuvua and Kelim is that they do not have a precisely fixed, measured, calculated value. The value fluctuates, the value is irregular, and therefore, if I'm buying an earthenware pot, I can say the entire pot is worth $10, but I cannot cut it into the pieces that make up the individual value in a clear way. And part of that is noting the fact that value of object, or in a meaningful sense, comes about from the fact that they are a complete whole, and the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Different than money, where if I have a pound of silver and I can cut it into all of its ounces, it's still worth the same amount, at least in a society. And now we have even finer precision and even more accurate assessment of monetary value because it's all digital and to a certain extent. That is, all of our money is totally abstract at this point. That has halachic implications as well. A dollar bill has no intrinsic value in the same way that gold does. Of course, gold doesn't really have intrinsic value in a clear sense anyway. Ben, you have a question?
Do you believe that you can't use Shaveh Kesef for each financial transaction, or this is a unique rule for Avadim and for Kiddushin?
So it's here, but again, what we know from the first Mishnah, that is, it actually comes in two stages. That is, first, the pasuk distinguished between Kesef and Shveh Kesef. That's the first half. That's Kesef Miknato. And then the second half, Yashiv Geulato, Geula, referring to a broader sense of financial obligation, comes now to include Shaveh Kesef Kekesef. But that means that Shaveh Kesef is subordinated in some sense to Kesef. Right. That means Shaveh Kesef has to play by the same rules. And one of the rules, according to Rav Yosef, is that it has to be Kaitz, which therefore would exclude using Shveh Kesef in certain kinds of transactions.
Would that I also just a regular Mekach Memgar? Like I can't.
Obviously not. You could barter things all you want.
So this is specifically for things like Avadim.
Exactly, where there needs to be I guess you could say it's because it has to have a halachic result. It's not just whether you're purchasing something or not, but it's actually you're trying to effect the status change. There you would need a sort of a more formalized notion of what is money.
For certain halachic transactions, don't we go out of the way to try to use coins that have at least some silver in them?
Yes. For Maser Sheni in particular, because the pasuk says Bakesef, with Kiddushin and with buying slaves or buying off indentured servitude and things like that, it seems like we have a broad.
But purchase is not a silver coin.
Exactly. Well, that's Machlokas Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, right? Beit Shammai says the minimal amount for Kiddushin is a dinar, which is a base silver coin, and pruta is a copper coin. So obviously a copper coin does not have silver in it, or very little silver, and therefore would not be a necessary requirement. Here we're talking about kesef in the sense of a monetary value rather than kesef as silver piece.
Machazit shekel has to be silver?
Machzidas shekel has to be a half
has to
shekel
be
of
of
silver, right?
silver
Mesachet
itself.
shkalim, because it says explicitly in the Torah that's part of the process of doing that mitzvah. The modern Machzidas shekel coming up with Purim is obviously not. It's got the sense of Zecher L'Mikdash, the Ashkenazi custom to give half of the local currency or 3 halves of the local currency to tzedakah, just to remember that in Adar we used to collect the Machzidas shekel. One other point about Purim that's coming up, interesting notion, it comes up because of Kiddushin, is that the Ramah in Siman, I think it's Taf Reish Tzadi Hey, the Ramah has a very strange halacha, which is that a man should not send mishloach manot to a widow because of the concern of that there will be a concern that it's safek kiddushin. And all of the achronim are very bothered by that. I don't understand. The woman obviously would have to consent, and the man would have to intend for it to be kiddushin in order for there to be a problem. So all sorts of achronim there trying to deal with the question of how would that even work? What's the concern? What's the problem going on there? What is the Ramah talking about? Take a look there to connect today's learning and next week's learning with Inyan Idioma. So with that, we've finished towards the top of Chedem Aleph. We'll conclude tomorrow on Shabbos.